Hello students, today we are going to take up a very interesting unit, that is speeches, and in speeches we are going to take up the author's purpose. First of all, let's have a look at what is author's purpose. Author's purpose actually refers to the reason why an author writes a particular text. Now, if we talk about the purpose, we have namely 4 types of purpose. First of all, when the author wants to inform the reader about something, or he wants to persuade the reader or the audience. Third, if he wants to entertain through his text. And finally, if he wants to express himself, then an author is going to write something. And now, when we are talking about speeches and when we are reading the speeches, we are supposed to identify the purpose. And how are we going to do that? We are going to do that by asking ourselves 2 major questions. First of all, is the author informing, persuading, entertaining, or simply expressing himself? Secondly, if he is persuading, what are the various techniques that he is employing to persuade the audience? So let's explore these techniques now. We have emotional appeal, repetition, ethical appeal, call to action, and powerful language and imagery. So we are going to explore and identify these persuasive techniques in a very famous and iconic speech given by Martin Luther King, and the name of the speech is I Have a Dream. So let's have a look at the background of this famous speech. It was actually delivered on 28th August 1963 during the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Also, this speech calls for hope, justice and equality. It highlights the fight against racial indiscrimination and systemic injustice. King's words become a symbol of the civil rights movement in America. So, we are going to show you one excerpt from this famous speech, and we will identify the purpose along with the persuasive techniques that Martin Luther King employed in this powerful speech. So, let's have a look at this excerpt first. Identify the purpose and techniques from we have also come to this hallowed spot to now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. Here goes the excerpt. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. Now let's identify the emotional appeal in this given excerpt. If we look at the phrase hallowed spot, it invokes reverence. Why? Because the speech was delivered at the Lincoln Memorial and it is associated with Abraham Lincoln. And in a way, Martin Luther raises this place to a symbolic place of sacredness and something that is to be honored. So he is actually arousing the emotions of the general public. Then, when he talks about all of God's children, he is appealing to the moral and spiritual values of the entire audience. So using such phrases actually evoke deep feelings of urgency, moral obligation and hope. Let's move on to repetition. You must have noticed, students, now is the time. This phrase has been repeated only in this one excerpt for 5 times. So what is the purpose of this repetition? It is not that Martin Luther King was short of words that he was repeating this phrase. It has a specific meaning behind it, and the repetition is important because it creates a rhythmic, memorable cadence, also driving home the message back into the audience's mind. Moving ahead, if we talk about the ethical appeal, he talks about making justice a reality for all of God's children. So you all are God's children, and we have to invoke freedom and equality for these God's people. Hence, he reinforces the credibility and aligns his cause with the moral righteousness. Finally, if we talk about call to action, he is asking the audience to take action. This is no time for lethargy. We have to move on and fight for racial discrimination, and we have to fight for our equality and freedom. And now the most important persuasive technique that Martin Luther employs in his speech is the use of powerful language and imagery. He uses certain phrases like the dark and desolate valley of segregation versus sunlit path of racial justice. So in this, he strikes a contrast between the desolation of injustice in comparison to the sunlit path of freedom and unity. Then he also contrasts the journey from oppression to equality. If we look at the second phrase, he says, to lift a nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Here he portrays racial injustice as something unstable, something dangerous, in contrast with the stability of unity that he aspires for his entire nation. So, in a way, if we identify the persuasive techniques and the purpose of this speech, we can find out that the primary purpose of this speech is to persuade and also inspire change through powerful language, imagery, and emotional appeal for racial equality and justice. So this was one example, one excerpt from this famous speech in which we identify the purpose along with the persuasive techniques. Now is the task time. You have to read the entire speech of Martin Luther King and identify persuasive techniques. And do you find these techniques compelling or not? I'm sure you would be able to easily identify these techniques and attempt the questions easily. So enjoy reading this speech and have a great day. Thank you. Happy learning.